Hello, my name is Mark Monlux, and you are watching Law and Artist. And I like to talk to my friend Daniel Abraham about legal issues.
My name is Daniel Abraham, former freelance illustrator, currently an attorney representing artists of various sorts, and I like to talk issues over with Mark Monlux because he's got a wide experience in these things.
But before any of that, a disclaimer. So please take a moment to read this because we've gotten awful tired of saying it. There we go. Daniel, one of the things I want to talk to you about is something that I like to call the power word in negotiation. And let me throw that up on the screen here. It's something that every 5-year-old knows. And that power word is no. And yet a lot of creative professionals, they have a really hard time saying this word no. But if you start off in a negotiation and say, no, I'm not going to do that, you're suddenly in a much better position than if you're saying, yes, I'm going to do that.
I can only agree with you in that, because any contract negotiation is all about saying no and repeatedly saying no until there is something that is worth saying yes to. You have to say no until they agree to it. Now, that doesn't mean you say no to everything, but no is a useful term because you can say, I can't do this, no to this, but I will say yes to this if you say yes to that. It's a trade-off. You start out with the no across the board, then you start doing trade-offs. I'll accept this if you accept that. I'm sure that this is something you've had experience with in your wide and varied career.
It is. Now, you were mentioning to me earlier before we got on air on a 3-step process that you like to do for negotiation. Can you repeat it again?
Okay. Well, there's an old adage in negotiation that the first person who does a hard price loses. In our last episode, we said you can always lower a high price, you can never raise a low one. So you start out with a high price. You're sitting around, somebody calls you up, somebody says, how much would you want to do a X job, Y job? You know, we love your work. We want you to do this job. How much do you want? First thing you do is get as much information from them as possible about the job, because they want price first. Price is the last thing you talk about. But once you get as much information as possible, you say, first, I'll call you back. I'm in the middle of something now. You may not be in the middle of something, but they don't have to know that. Therefore, you get back to them after you've had time to let your heart calm down. You know, somebody actually wants your work, and you can think about what the job is worth. Then you quote them a high price. It's a $2,000 job. You quote them $5,000. They clutch their pearls. They say, oh my God, this is a terrible amount of money. We can't possibly afford that. You say, okay, how close can you come?
And there you go. That's key thing. I gotta tell you, one time I was with a client talking about a project for 4 hours before we got around to mentioning a price. And this was for a logo. And they said, oh, we only had a budget of $50 for a logo. I learned my lesson right then. You got to start talking about price fairly early in the negotiation before you even start talking about the project.
Well, yeah. If they've got a price, you know, if they've got a budget that is so beneath contempt that it's not worth doing, then you've got to be able to tell them bye-bye real quickly. But once you say, you know, big price, and then you say, how close can you come? They give you an idea of what they're willing to do, but you've already set that high price. And then you get a second bite at the apple. The second bite is you say, well, that price, remember, it's a $2,000 job. You were willing to do it for $1,750, and you originally quoted them $5,000. Okay, they've quoted you $2,000, and you say, well, how about we split the difference between the $5,000 and the $2,000 you offered? And that gives you a chance to raise the price yet again. And this is something that you need to take advantage of. This is when you're arguing for yourself, not for the client, because the client is arguing for himself or herself, not for you.
And I think we've pretty much covered. Oh, I'm stalling out here. I had a thought and I totally derailed it. So.
Well, I think we've gone over some of the basics of negotiation and of standing up for yourself, which is what we really were trying to do in these couple of sessions. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I think we should put together a list of some other things that people should consider when they're doing contract negotiations, because this is certainly a topic that we can go out a lot more on.
Oh yes, oh yes. There are all sorts of things.
That's the end of this episode. Daniel and I will be back in another one. We might be talking about more contract negotiations, or we might be talking about something else completely different.
But always a pleasure, Mark.
Always a pleasure, Daniel.